general visceral afferent, general somatic afferent, general visceral efferent, general somatic efferent, special visceral afferent, special somatic afferent, special visceral efferent, and special somatic efferent. What are these confusing terms? You must have encountered these terms while studying neuroanatomy, neurophysiology, and even the neuroembryology, but I'm sure you don't know what is the actual concept of these terms. I know many of you must have crammed up that specific fiber is that type of it is classified according to, let's say, special visceral afferent and so on. You must have crammed up such stuff, but I'm sure many of you at least do not know the actual meaning, the actual concept of these terms. So in today's visual lecture, we will talk about the peripheral nerve fibers classification, and the peripheral nerve fibers are classified into these 8 terms. According to these 8 terms, let's go to a conceptual dive of what are these terms. So we will start from the very basic idea that we have nervous system, right? And the nervous system is divided into 2 parts. Mainly it consists of the central nervous system, and it also consists of peripheral nervous system, PNS. So central nervous system, it is further divided into brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, it is further divided into, basically we have 2 main types of nerves. We have the cranial nerves, and we have the spinal nerves. Now both of these nerves, cranial as well as spinal nerves, both of these nerves, their fibers, basically they are further classified into these 8 terms that we have discussed earlier: general visceral afferent, general somatic afferent, and so on, that we will discuss in today's lecture. So this is the basic idea. Now out of these cranial and spinal nerves, the spinal nerves, they originate from the spinal cord. So from spinal cord the spinal nerves originate, right? They are either motor nerves, that motor nerve fibers that they are taking order from the spinal cord, or they may be sensory, they may be taking sensory information and so on. And about the cranial nerves, they originate directly from our brain. So they are originating directly from our brain. Now basically a single nerve, it may be cranial nerve, it may be a spinal nerve. Let me draw a single nerve, a very schematic diagram, of course not anatomically correct. So let's suppose here I am drawing a nerve. Of course it is further divided by the endoneurium, perineurium, but in this lecture I am just oversimplifying it right now, that I am not going into those details. But of course a single nerve is containing a lots of different fibers. It may be containing many different fibers, right? So many different nerve fibers are there in any of the nerve. It could be any nerve. It could be a cranial nerve, it could be a spinal nerve, right? Now we have many different nerve fibers within this nerve. Now each nerve may have more than one types of fibers. This is important. For example, let's assume that this is a cranial nerve. Okay, let's suppose this is cranial nerve 3, the oculomotor nerve. So oculomotor nerve, it is actually containing 2 types of fibers. It is actually containing general somatic afferent fibers. For example, these fibers here, they may be general somatic afferent fibers going towards the muscles of the eye, right? So general somatic efferent fibers may be there. Of course, don't get confused. We will discuss what is the meaning of the general somatic efferent. I am just giving a sneak peek into the future part of this lecture so that you will get to know that what we will be discussing in today's lecture. So don't worry if you are not able to understand. So a single nerve may be containing many different types of nerve fibers. It may be containing, for example, this third nerve, it may be containing general somatic efferent. Not maybe, it is actually containing general somatic efferent, and along with that it is also containing the general visceral efferent to the lacrimal gland. Not lacrimal gland, I'm sorry, to the sphincter pupillae muscle. Yeah, so we will learn these things later, but it's just a sneak peek into the future. So the point is that we cannot say actually that cranial nerves are subdivided into these types or spinal nerves are subdivided into these types. It's not correct. So actually their fibers are subdivided, not nerves. Today's lecture is not about classification of peripheral nerves. This is the thing that I want to clear even at the start of lecture, that we are not discussing the classification of peripheral nerve fibers, peripheral nerves. We are actually discussing the classification of peripheral nerve fibers which are inside the actual nerve. So actual nerve may be containing a peripheral nerve may be containing many different types of nerve fiber. Even it may be containing a single nerve fiber, or it may be containing more than one type of nerve fiber. For example, trochlear nerve, it is just containing a single nerve fiber, that is general somatic efferent nerve fiber. So it may or may not be containing one or more types of fibers. That is the basic prerequisite in understanding this lecture. Now here, if you focus on the naming of these terms, how these terms are named, actually these terms consisting of three parts. Here you can see general, then visceral, then efferent, then general somatic efferent, then general visceral efferent. So here let's talk about the last part first. So first, their last part, if I am talking about first, that there may be the nerve fiber may be afferent or it may be efferent. So here in blue color I have shown afferent. So some are afferent or others may be efferent. So afferent or efferent, right? Then the nerve fiber may be taking information or supplying the information, supplying the motor information to viscera or to somatic organs. So it may be visceral or somatic. So here orange color I have shown visceral, yeah, and somatic is shown with blue color. So it may be afferent or efferent, it may be visceral or somatic, right? And finally it may be this is number 3. So finally it may be general or it may be special. So if we combine these three parts, basically what we will do in today's lecture is that we will take a look at the nerve fiber and we will see that whether this nerve fiber is afferent or efferent, whether this nerve fiber is visceral or somatic, and whether this nerve fiber is general or special. And then we will then finally label it like this, that if it is efferent then we will write efferent, then if it is somatic then we will write somatic, and if it is general then we will write general. So this way it becomes general somatic efferent. Similarly, this is the general visceral efferent. If it is containing efferent nerve fibers, if it is containing visceral nerve fibers, and if it is containing the general type of nerve fibers. Now, what is the meaning of these terms? That we will now try to understand one by one, and then later in upcoming parts of lecture, what I will do is that I will try to classify the nerve fibers of cranial nerves as well as the spinal nerves. So first, let's talk about what is the meaning of afferent versus efferent. Let me first write it here, afferent versus efferent, that we will discuss. Then we will talk about the visceral versus somatic, and then finally we will talk about the general versus special, and out of these the second one, visceral versus somatic, is slightly more complicated. Others are very easy to understand. So let's first talk about afferent versus efferent. Now afferent is very easy and efferent is also very easy. That if a nerve fiber is taking information towards the central nervous system, doesn't matter whether it's brain or spinal cord, so if it is taking information towards the central nervous system, then this is the afferent nerve fibers. So let's make a simplified diagram, Dr. Najeeb style diagram of central nervous system. So for example, here this is the skin, right? So it's a part of skin. Simplified diagram again. So if some nerve fibers are coming from the skin and they are taking sensory information, of course, towards the central nervous system, they may be taking either to the spinal cord or to the brain stem, right? So that type of nerve fibers they are taking towards CNS, that type of nerve fibers are afferent nerve fibers. It's very easy. Afferent is taking towards the central nervous system. Now opposite to that, if I draw the central nervous system again, and again my simplified diagram, let me draw it very quickly. So now if let's suppose the order is coming from the brain or from the spinal cord, I mean from the central nervous system towards an effector organ, it is coming towards an effector organ, or we can say the nerve fiber is taking information away from the central nervous system, then such nerve fiber will be called efferent. So efferent is taking information away from CNS, and the afferent they are taking information towards the central nervous system. Now logically it's very easy to understand that if a piece of information is coming towards the central nervous system, it means that this is taking some sensory information, isn't it? It's very easy to understand. So afferent nerve fibers are sensory because they are taking information towards the central nervous system. And if the information is going, if an order is going towards from the central nervous system towards an effector organ, or you can say away from the central nervous system, it means that this is some kind of order towards the effector organ, for example muscle. So if for example there is an order to move this muscle, then it means that such nerve fibers are motor nerve fibers. So efferent nerve fibers are motor nerve fibers, and the afferent nerve fibers, they are sensory nerve fibers. It's very easy to understand. Now the real challenge is to understand the difference between visceral and somatic nerve fibers. But don't worry, Dr. Aizaz is here to help you, and I will try to simplify it as much as possible, and I will try to make it easier for you to understand these things. So visceral, as the name indicates, the viscera, it means it is related somehow with the viscera. So basically the visceral nerve fibers, they are either taking information or giving orders to the deeply seated viscera, or we can simply say that they are involved in innervating the deeply seated viscera. For example, they may be innervating they are actually innervating the gastrointestinal system. Most of the part of gastrointestinal system, they are innervating the viscera of our urogenital system, right? And they are also involved in innervating our respiratory system, and finally they are also involved in innervating our cardiovascular system. Much simplified diagram here of our heart. It is not anatomically correct, but it's just a symbolic to make you remember that it is involved. Visceral nerve fibers, they are involved in innervating the deeply seated viscera. Now if I draw a viscera, I don't know why again and again I am drawing stomach. So for example here, if I draw the viscera, now viscera is lined from inside with epithelial lining, and this epithelium is called mucosa. So mucosa. Now some fibers are innervating the mucosa and they are taking the sensory information from the mucosa, right? So they are taking sensory information from the mucosa, and this sensory information is basically telling our central nervous system about the situation of internal environment of our deeply seated visceras, right? So of course they are not going here directly to cerebellum, they are going towards the brain or spinal cord, right? So they may be taking the information from the mucosa, or there may be of course glands here, so they may also be innervating the glands. And of course along with that, surrounding these viscera is the smooth muscle layer, right? So external muscular layer is there surrounding them. So these visceral nerve fibers, they are also innervating the smooth muscles of our deeply seated visceras, and of course they are also innervating the glands, right? So let's assume that these are glands. Of course it's a much simplified diagram. So they may be, actually they are innervating the what is this, muscularis layer, and as well as they are also innervating the glands. So visceral, these are the visceral afferent which are sensory, and these are the visceral efferents which are motor, which are going towards the muscles as well as the glands, right? So they may increase or decrease the function of gland. I mean they may stimulate or they may inhibit the glands related with GIT or any type of gland in our body. In this example I have just portrayed the glands of GIT. Of course any gland, even the superficial gland, this is interesting, superficial glands of skin, for example, I mean the sweat glands, even those glands are innervated by visceral nerve fibers. Logically they are of course superficial tissue, they you must be thinking that they should be innervated by somatic nerve fibers, but all types of glands, this is a unique exception here, that all types of glands, whether superficial or deep, they are all innervated by visceral nerve fibers. I have told you about the smooth muscle. Along with the smooth muscle, of course, in heart we do not have smooth muscle, we have special types of muscles that are cardiac muscles. So cardiac muscles are also innervated by visceral nerve fibers. So here let me write it for you that they innervate the mucosa, visceral nerve fiber, they innervate the mucosa of internal viscera, they also innervate the glands, and they also innervate muscles. And which muscles specifically? They innervate the smooth muscles, and they also innervate the cardiac muscle, basically motor nerve fibers that are going towards the smooth muscle as well as cardiac muscle cells. Now skeletal muscles, they are not generally innervated by visceral nerve fibers, but there is one exception of the muscles, skeletal muscles, that are still innervated by visceral nerve fibers, and they are innervated by special visceral efferent nerve fibers that I will tell you later. But before that, let me tell you something about the skeletal muscle, and along with that I will tell you another important thing as well. So here let me draw another diagram for you. So here let's suppose there is the notochord, right? It's a simplified diagram again, and along with that let me first draw the endoderm. So with the endoderm, after folding, what happens that endoderm is forming the GIT tube like this. So endoderm is forming the GIT tube like this here. I hope you can understand this. Now what happens that with the what is this notochord, lateral to notochord, we have the paraxial mesoderm. So we have paraxial mesoderm which continues with the intermediate mesoderm, and which then further continues as lateral plate mesoderm, and lateral plate mesoderm is split into two parts. Here let me first complete this diagram. Okay, intermediate mesoderm and here as well, of course, the paraxial mesoderm, and here is the paraxial mesoderm. I hope you can understand my drawing here. Now then there is lateral plate mesoderm, and lateral plate mesoderm consists of two parts. One which is plastering the endoderm here, which is the intraembryonic subplanchnic mesoderm, intraembryonic subplanchnic or subplanchnopleuric mesoderm like this. So we have intraembryonic subplanchnic mesoderm here. I hope you can understand this intraembryonic subplanchnic mesoderm. And along with that we have the outer layer, which is the intraembryonic somatopleuric or intraembryonic somatic mesoderm, which is lining the body wall like this. It should be somewhat beautiful, right? Shouldn't be too rough diagram, right? So intraembryonic somatic mesoderm, and of course so this is the diagram here for you, and yeah, so let's complete it. And outside that, somewhat here will be our beloved neural tube here, which I haven't shown previously, and surrounding all these structures will be the, from outside will be our ectoderm like this. Ectoderm will be surrounding everything like this. So basically this is a beautiful cylindrical body design. Right, now here the thing that I want to tell you is that the these paraxial mesoderm, it gets basically divided into segments. So for example, it may be divided into, let's suppose this is a single segment, then again another segments, and of course we will have multiple segments. And we have discussed these details in our previous lecture about the somites. So basically these segments are somites. If I draw here another diagram, that for example here is the segment of paraxial mesoderm. This is, let's suppose, one segment. Then we will have another segment below that. Right, so in this way we have multiple segments. In this way we will have multiple segments. Again here we will have another segment. Yeah, so these basically segments, these split segments of paraxial mesoderm, this is nothing more than the split parts of paraxial mesoderm. So these split segments are basically called somites. So for example, this is somite number 1, this is somite number 2, this is somite number 3. Now cells from these somites will migrate into these cells, they will migrate into here, they will migrate into the lateral plate mesoderm, and here they will form muscles and other things as well. Right now I'm just focusing on muscles. So here they will form the muscles of the body wall, and along with that they will also go to limb buds to form the muscles of skeletal muscles, not the other types of muscle, only skeletal muscles. They will form the skeletal muscles of the body wall, and they will form the skeletal muscles of the limbs. Most of our skeletal muscles are those which are inside our limbs. For example, we have your favorite biceps muscle, triceps muscle, and then in the legs we have gastrocnemius and soleus and so on. Many different types of muscles. These muscles we have, most of the muscles we have either in our limbs or in the body wall. For example, we have intercostal muscles and so on, our abdominal muscles. So these muscles are actually derived from somites, and somites are the segments of paraxial mesoderm. Here again they will be forming the muscles of our limbs. Right, so what we can say that most of the skeletal muscles, they are derived from somites. Most of the skeletal muscles are somatic in origin. Most of the skeletal muscles are somatic in origin, right? So somatic muscles are actually innervated by somatic nerve fibers. So let's write it here. So it innervates the somatic muscles that originate from somites, and basically these are voluntary muscles. These are most of the not all, most of the skeletal muscles. So what we can say that most of the skeletal muscles are innervated by somatic nerve fibers, and because they are somatic in origin, somatic, it's very easy to understand. But those skeletal muscles which are not somatic in origin, they are then supplied by visceral nerve fibers. So what are those muscles? Those muscles, as it turns out, those muscles are pharyngeal arch derived muscles. They are derived from pharyngeal arches. For example, muscles of mastication, the muscles of facial expression, then some ear muscles and so on, that we will discuss later. So pharyngeal arches derived skeletal muscles, even though they are skeletal muscles, but still, because they are derived from pharyngeal arches, they are still supplied by visceral nerve fibers. One of the reason is that the pharyngeal arches are in intimate relationship with our pharynx, which is the part of viscera, which is considered to be a part of viscera, and there are certain other reasons as well that I will discuss later. So, and by the way, all these muscles, smooth muscles as well as cardiac muscles, they are also non-somatic in origin. Typically they are non-somatic in origin, although there is some research that is going on, and some of the articles they say that the muscles of aorta, the smooth muscles of aorta, they have some contribution from the somites, but generally speaking it is believed that all the muscles here in this category, they are non-somatic in origin. So we can very simply and categorically say that non-somatic muscles are innervated by visceral nerve fibers, and somatic muscles are innervated by somatic nerve fibers. It's very easy to understand, isn't it? Now finally, and before that, I will also mention here that this visceral nerve fiber, it is involved in sensing internal chemical environment, internal chemical milieu, or which is what they technically write it, internal chemical milieu or environment of viscera of our body. So basically it is related with internal environment, typically chemical environment. Of course, mechanical stretching as well is also sensed by this, but what they say is that these are usually chemical sensors. Typically they are chemical sensors when it comes to efferent fibers, but here they are usually this is usually somatic. It is usually involved with external environment. For example, if an insect is crawling on my skin, that will be sensed, that is superficial and external environment, that will be sensed by the skin, the nerves that are innervating the skin, and that are somatic nerve fibers. And if an insect, well, not insect, I mean a pathogen or maybe a parasite, if a parasite is causing an inflammation in deep inside my GIT, and it is irritating the mucosa of GIT, such it will then produce the visceral pain, the diffused visceral pain, which will be taken up by the visceral nerve fibers. So internal chemical environment, that is sensed by visceral nerve fiber, external environment, that is sensed by somatic nerve fibers. This is what is typical. Of course, there may be some certain exceptions as well that I will talk later in this lecture series. Now about the somatic nerve fibers, they are involved in superficial tissue. They are involved in innervating the superficial tissues. For example, they are involved in innervating your skin, your somatic muscles, somatically derived muscles, skeletal muscles, and your tendons, plus your joints. And some people also say that bones are also included in this. And the important exception is, here is the glands. The glands are not innervated. Glands are never innervated by somatic nerve fibers. Even if the glands may be superficial, for example sweat glands, even those glands are innervated by visceral nerve fibers. That is sort of a convention. So yeah, let's move forward. And finally, here one more thing about the embryological origin. Let me tell you, if you focus here, that this is the endoderm, it is forming the GIT, and most of the viscera, they develop from endoderm. Along with endoderm, here is the endoderm. Along with endoderm, what is this? This is the subplanchnic mesoderm. So most of our deeply seated viscera of our body, they are innervated by endoderm plus subplanchnic mesoderm. Not innervated, I mean they originate from endoderm plus subplanchnic mesoderm. Both of these collectively, they are termed as subplanchnoplura. So because viscera originate from the subplanchnoplura, it is said that target tissues of visceral nerve fibers, they originate from subplanchnoplura. So subplanchnopluric in origin. Their target tissue are subplanchnopluric in origin. Also note that between these two, the somatopluric mesoderm, subplanchnopluric mesoderm and somatopluric mesoderm, between them is the intraembryonic coelom, which will form the pleura, pericardium and peritoneum. And interestingly, the visceral peritoneum is also innervated by visceral nerve fiber, and somatic peritoneum, actually parietal peritoneum, it's called parietal peritoneum, it will actually form parietal peritoneum. So parietal peritoneum, because it is somatopluric in origin, it is innervated by somatic nerve fibers. And also note that if you focus here, that most of the tissues which are innervated, most of our tissue, for example skin, for example the muscles, most of the tissue which are innervated by somatic nerve fibers, they are somatopluric in origin. What is meaning of somatopluric? That they are either derived from ectoderm or they are derived from, what is this, which mesoderm? Somatopluric mesoderm, and both of them, they are collectively termed as somatoplura. So their target tissue, I mean the somatic nerve fibers, their target tissue, they are derived from, target tissues are derived from somatoplura. Their target tissue are derived from subplanchnoplura, and their target tissue, they are derived from somatoplura. And finally, if I draw the section of our spinal cord, very simplified diagram again, Dr. Najeeb style, here is our, like this, and here there will be central canal. Now here this is dorsal horn, this and this dorsal horn, this is the ventral horn, and at some places we also have lateral horn as well. Now the nerve fibers that originate from the lateral horn, this is the lateral horn, nerve fibers that originate from lateral horn, they are visceral, right? And nerve fibers that originate either from dorsal horn or from the ventral horn, both of these, they are they are somatic. So what we can say that if we talk about spinal nerves, in the cranial nerves the situation is little bit more complicated. We will not go into that right now, later we will discuss that as well, but right now let's not go into that. So if we talk about spinal nerves, in spinal nerves these nerve fibers, visceral nerve fibers, they originate from lateral horn. Let me write it for you that in spinal cord, lateral horn, they originate, visceral nerve fibers, they originate from lateral horn, and the somatic nerve fibers, they originate from either from the dorsal horn or from the ventral horn. If they are originating from dorsal horn, they are sensory, they are afferent, they are visceral afferent. And if they are originating from the ventral horn, then they are motor, they are efferent, visceral efferent. And if we talk about, so actually we will talk about that later, about the visceral, we will discuss the details later. Now let's move forward. And now finally let's talk about general versus somatic. Now general, they are concerned with common sensations, and they innervate the commonly present tissues or organs. For example, the generally lying skeletal muscles all over our body, they are innervated by general fibers, general somatic afferent fibers. But if there are some rare types of muscles, for example skeletal muscles, which are usually derived from somites, but if skeletal muscles are not derived from somites, they are derived from pharyngeal arch, that type of skeletal muscles, they are rare in our body, so they must be supplied by these special fibers. So rare are supplied by special, they are so special that they are supplying rare, and of course these fibers are rare. They are so rare that they are present only in the cranial nerves. They are not present in the spinal nerves. Spinal nerves are so common that they are just harboring the general fibers, general type of fibers. There are no special fibers in the spinal nerves. They are only present in the cranial nerves. I will discuss the details later one by one, but just for the sake of concept that general are taking the common sensation, for example touch, pain, temperature everywhere in our body, or skeletal muscles everywhere in our body, which are not rare. All these common types of muscles, they are innervated by general fibers, and special or are innervating some special structures. For example, one of the example is the taste fibers. You cannot taste with your leg, or you cannot taste with your hand. So these are some rare sensations which are taken up by special nerve fibers. So this was about today's lecture. In the upcoming part, we will talk about the spinal nerves and nerve fibers in the spinal nerves, and then finally we will talk about the nerve fibers present in the cranial nerves. Thank you so much for watching this video.